He pushed through the glass door of a dusty roadside diner just looking for a cup of coffee, and instead ran face to face with the last person he ever expected to see, an old friend who once changed the course of his life. The smell of frying bacon and burnt toast wasn't what Daniel Hayes had in mind for his Tuesday morning. At this hour, he was supposed to be halfway into downtown Phoenix, going over property reports in the back seat of his car. But a shredded tire had left him stranded off the interstate just outside Yuma, Arizona. The only sign of civilization within walking distance was a squat little place with a flickering neon sign that read Maggie's Diner. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle as Daniel stepped inside. It felt like walking into another decade. The vinyl booths were patched with duct tape. The walls were covered with sun-bleached pictures of local softball teams, and a hulking jukebox sat in the corner like a fossil that hadn't played a tune since the 80s. Daniel adjusted the lapels of his jacket, the sharp navy lines of his suit looking far too polished for a place where the regulars wore dusty boots and faded ball caps. He slid into a corner booth, asked the waitress for black coffee, and was just pulling out his phone when a voice cut in. "Morning. Want to start with some breakfast?" He looked up, and for a long second his mind went completely blank. The woman holding a pen and order pad was Grace Miller. Not just any Grace Miller, the Grace Miller, his best friend from back in middle school, the girl who had quizzed him on fractions while sitting on the stoop of her family's apartment complex, the one who taught him how to laugh off the kids who teased him about his discount store sneakers, the girl who once swore she'd conquer the world beyond their crumbling neighborhood. But here she was, hair tied back in a messy bun, apron faded and fraying, her smile looking a little too practiced. She didn't recognize him, not right away. Her hands were busy wiping down the pad of paper, her mouth twitching like she was trying to smile through exhaustion. Daniel's throat tightened. He hadn't seen her in over 20 years. Back then, they'd both promised each other they'd leave their small corner of struggle behind and never look back. He had kept that promise, and then some. By 45, he'd built a real estate empire that stretched across half the Southwest. His name had appeared in business magazines. Grace, meanwhile, was standing in front of him now, her shoulders slightly slumped, a faint tremor in her hand as she wrote. He tried not to stare, but it was impossible. Then she finally looked at him, really looked, and her brow furrowed. "Wait, Danny? Danny Hayes?" she said slowly, tilting her head. Her voice still carried the same warmth he remembered, but her eyes, they were different. "Hey, Grace," he said, half rising from his seat. "Been a long time." She let out a small laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "I'll say, what are you doing in a place like this?" He could have told her the truth. Flat tire, wrong exit, bad luck. But something in her tone made him choose his words carefully. "Just passing through." Before either of them could say more, a sharp voice called her from the kitchen. Grace scribbled something quickly on her notepad and hurried off. The cook, a heavy-set man with a grease-stained bandana, barked an order Daniel couldn't catch over the clang of dishes. Grace balanced two plates on one arm and moved with the rhythm of someone who'd been doing this for years. Daniel sat back, fingers tapping against his mug. He wasn't used to waiting for people. In his world, meetings revolved around his schedule, but here, in this diner, he was just another customer. Finally, after topping off someone's sweet tea and laughing politely with a couple of regulars, Grace slid into the booth across from him for just a moment. "Okay," she said, her smile widening. "It's definitely you. Same serious face and everything." Daniel smirked. "Guess I never grew out of it." Her eyes darted over his tailored suit, the watch on his wrist, the polished shoes that looked like they'd never seen dirt. "You look different, though, in a good way. So what have you been up to all these years?" He hesitated. Telling her the truth, that he was now a multi-millionaire real estate developer, could change everything. He'd seen it happen before. Conversations tightened, smiles became guarded. People assumed you thought you were better. The last thing he wanted was a wall between them. "I've been in real estate," he said simply. "Keeps me busy." "Real estate?" She raised an eyebrow. "Like Selling houses, something like that. He took a sip of coffee, dodging the weight of her question. Her smile stayed polite, but he saw the flicker in her eyes. Curiosity, maybe even doubt. Still, she didn't press. "So just a pit stop in Yuma?" she asked, glancing toward the kitchen when the bell dinged again. "Yeah," he said. "One of those wrong place, wrong time things." "That's rare," she replied, standing again. "Most folks who come here are regulars, or just plain lost." Daniel chuckled. "Guess I fall into the second category then." She grabbed his menu with a grin. "Don't disappear on me." He watched her weave through the diner again, greeting truckers and farmers by name, offering smiles even when none came back. He remembered the two of them talking once about opening a bookstore together. They dreamed of beanbag chairs, murals on the walls, kids from the neighborhood coming in after school. Sitting here now, watching her balance plates instead of books, made his stomach twist. But what shook him even more was how easily she disguised whatever was weighing her down. He was starting to realize he wanted to know the story behind her smile. Grace returned a few minutes later and set a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of him. "On the house?" she said with a shrug. "You don't have to do that," Daniel replied quickly. She just smiled again, the same smile she'd always had. A little stubborn, a little kind, and Daniel Hayes, who had thought he'd left all the ghosts of his past behind, suddenly realized that maybe some promises you make as kids never really let go. The Arizona sun had a way of beating down that made even the strongest men feel small. Daniel Hayes, age 45, had been on the road since dawn, his polished Lincoln Town car humming steadily along Interstate 8. He had a meeting scheduled in Phoenix with investors, serious men in tailored suits who expected punctuality, sharp reports, and unshakable confidence. Daniel had built his reputation on those very qualities. That morning, everything was lined up. His assistant had confirmed the numbers. His driver had packed fresh copies of the proposals, and his schedule, down to the minute, was flawless. But life, as Daniel knew all too well, had a habit of tearing holes in perfect plans. The blowout happened just past Gila Bend, miles from anything resembling a service station. A loud pop, a violent shudder, and suddenly the car was jerking to the shoulder of the road, the acrid smell of burnt rubber filling the air. His driver cursed under his breath, pulled the vehicle to a stop, and announced what Daniel already suspected. "We're not going anywhere soon." Daniel stepped out into the desert heat, his leather shoes crunching against gravel. The landscape stretched endlessly, saguaro cactus rising like silent sentinels, the horizon shimmering with heat waves. There was no traffic in sight, just the buzzing of insects and the distant rumble of an 18-wheeler. His driver made a call for roadside assistance, but the dispatcher's words were less than comforting. 2, maybe 3 hours before anyone can reach you. Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to keep the irritation from boiling over. A man like him did not sit idle. His empire stretched across 5 states. His time was worth more than he cared to calculate. And yet here he was, stalled on the edge of nowhere with nothing but a busted tire. Scanning the landscape, he noticed a faded sign down the frontage road. Maggie's Diner, coffee, breakfast, open 24 hours. The paint was peeling, the neon half dead, but it was shelter. And more importantly, coffee. "Stay with the car," Daniel told his driver. "I'll walk." The diner sat low to the ground, its tin roof glinting in the sun. As Daniel approached, he noticed the cracked parking lot dotted with dusty pickups, a rusted Ford Crown Vic, and one tired sedan that looked like it had lost its fight with the desert years ago. The bell above the glass door gave a weak jingle as he pushed inside, and for a moment he felt as though he had stepped backward in time. The air smelled of frying bacon, burnt coffee, and lemony cleaning solution. Vinyl booths with duct tape patches lined the walls, and faded photographs of local softball teams, all dated from the late 80s and early 90s, hung crooked in mismatched frames. A jukebox sat silent in the corner, coated with a thin layer of dust, like it hadn't played a song since Ronald Reagan was in office. The customers were the kind you'd expect in a roadside diner: truckers with sunburned necks, farmers in mud caked boots, and one elderly couple quietly sharing a plate of pancakes. Daniel's suit, custom Italian wool, made him stick out like a sore thumb. More than one head turned as he slid into a corner booth, his polished shoes clicking against the floor tiles that had lost their shine decades ago. A waitress dropped off a menu without looking up. "Coffee?" she asked, already reaching for the pot. "Black," Daniel replied. He pulled out his phone, instinctively checking for messages, though the signal out here was barely strong enough to load a weather app. His fingers tapped restlessly on the table. He had no patience for waiting. That's when he heard it, a voice that tugged at something buried deep in memory. "Morning. Want to start with some breakfast?" Daniel looked up. For a long second, the world around him, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, even the faint whine of the air conditioner, seemed to fade into silence. Standing there, not 5 feet away, was Grace Miller. Not a stranger who happened to share the same name, not some distant look-alike. No, the Grace Miller, his best friend from middle school, the girl who had once sat on the front steps of her mother's apartment with him, trading homework tips and bold dreams about escaping the neighborhood that weighed them both down. Grace had been the first person to believe in him. She'd drilled him on fractions until his grades turned around. She'd defended him when older kids mocked his thrift store sneakers. She had sworn with all the fire of a 14-year-old that one day she would travel the world, open a bookstore, and never settle for the hand life had dealt her. But here she was, apron tied around her waist, hair pulled back in a loose bun, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. A faint scar crossed her knuckle, and there was a tired droop in her shoulders that no teenager's dream should ever lead to. She didn't recognize him at first. She was too busy wiping her hands on a dish towel, balancing a pad and pen with the ease of someone who had repeated the same motion thousands of times. Daniel's throat tightened. 25 years, a lifetime. And here she was, inches from his table. Finally, her gaze lifted, meeting his. She froze, squinting just slightly, her head tilting the way it used to when she was trying to solve a tough math problem. "Wait, Danny? Danny Hayes?" Her voice carried the same warmth it always had, but her eyes, those once bright eyes, were shaded with something harder now. Daniel stood halfway from his booth, his polished demeanor crumbling for the first time in years. "Hey, Grace. Been a long time." She let out a startled laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "I'll say, what on earth are you doing in a place like this?" He could have told her the truth. A flat tire, a ruined schedule, an unwanted detour, but something about the way she asked made him choose his words more carefully. "Just passing through." Before she could reply, the cook in the back barked something over the clatter of pots. Grace scribbled a note on her order pad and hurried away, her voice trailing as she promised to come back. Daniel sat down slowly, his fingers wrapped around the mug of coffee she had poured. He wasn't a man accustomed to waiting. In his world, meetings paused when he entered, conversations bent around him. But here, he was just another customer. He watched her move around the diner, weaving between tables with practiced rhythm, balancing plates on one arm, laughing politely at a farmer's joke, offering comfort to an old woman whose hands trembled while cutting her pancakes. Grace wore her role like a costume, smiling, nodding, pouring, refilling. But Daniel saw what the other customers didn't. He saw the cracks, the fleeting moments when her smile faded, when she rubbed her wrist like it ached, when her gaze lingered a second too long on the window as though she were looking for an exit. At last she returned, sliding into the booth across from him with a quick smile. "It's really you," she said. "Still got that serious face." He chuckled, surprised at how natural it felt. "Guess I never grew out of it." Her eyes flicked over his suit, the gleaming watch on his wrist, the expensive leather shoes that had never seen desert dust. "You look different, in a good way. What have you been up to all these years?" He hesitated. He knew the weight his truth carried. Saying real estate empire would only build a wall between them. He sipped his coffee. Real estate keeps me busy. Real estate? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Like flipping houses? Something like that, he replied, dodging the question with a practiced ease. Her smile stayed polite, but her eyes told another story. Curiosity, maybe even suspicion. Still, she didn't push. She glanced back toward the kitchen when the bell dinged, then looked at him once more. Strange seeing you here. Makes me think about all the stuff we used to talk about. The bookstore? He asked. Grace's mouth curved into a faint smile. Yeah, guess life had other plans. She stood as another customer waved for her attention, and just like that, the moment was gone. But Daniel sat back in the booth, his coffee growing cold, a storm brewing in his chest. The desert had brought him here by accident, but now he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't chance at all. Something about seeing Grace again, here of all places, felt like the beginning of something he wasn't ready to name. For the first time in years, Daniel Hayes felt the past reaching out to him, and he wasn't sure whether it was a blessing, a burden, or the start of a reckoning he didn't know he needed. Grace Miller moved through Maggie's diner the way a weary actress moves through her final curtain call. The apron tied around her waist was faded, its original color long surrendered to grease stains and countless washes. Her smile appeared on cue, polite and cheerful enough to reassure the regulars who expected it, but Daniel Hayes could see through it. He had built his life on reading people, investors, rivals, city planners, and he recognized when someone was wearing a mask. Grace's mask was flawless to the casual eye. She poured coffee with steady hands, laughed at farmers' tired jokes, remembered orders without writing them down. But Daniel noticed the little things, the way her hand trembled ever so slightly when she reached for the coffee pot, the faint limp in her left step that grew sharper as the shift dragged on, and the flicker of weariness in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. It had been 25 years since they last sat side by side, teenagers dreaming of bookstores and freedom, but Daniel still remembered her as the girl who radiated stubborn hope, the girl who swore she would never settle for the narrow life their neighborhood tried to force on her. And now here she was, pouring coffee in a desert diner at 44, hiding her exhaustion behind a smile that looked more like a shield than an expression. When she finally circled back to his booth, Daniel leaned forward, studying her face with an intensity that made her shift uncomfortably. You're staring, she said lightly, pouring him another cup of coffee. I'm remembering, Daniel replied. Her eyes softened for just a second, but then she quickly dropped her gaze to the table, stirring sugar into her own mug. Well, don't look too close. I'm not 16 anymore. You still smile the same way, he said. She laughed, but it was the polite laugh again, the one she gave the truckers when they told her the same jokes they'd been recycling for 20 years. Daniel caught the difference. He remembered her real laugh, the one that used to echo across the courtyard of her apartment building, the one that bubbled up when she teased him about his serious face or when she beat him at cards. Now that laugh was buried. What's real estate like? Grace asked, changing the subject. You flipping houses, or is it something bigger? Daniel hesitated. He never lied, but he had learned how to edit the truth. Bigger. Apartments, commercial properties, developments like that. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. That sounds intense. It has its moments. She nodded slowly, tapping her spoon against the rim of her mug. Good for you. You always did work hard. Remember how you used to help me with history even though you hated it? Daniel chuckled, relieved at the shift back to safer ground. Still do hate it. I only helped because you threatened to stop tutoring me in math. For the first time, her laugh came out genuine, rich and unguarded. The sound pulled Daniel back across the decades, back to evenings spent hunched over textbooks, whispering answers under dim streetlights, back to the belief that they were destined for more. True, she said, shaking her head with a grin. You were hopeless with dates and presidents. And you were hopeless with fractions. Grace sipped her coffee, then lowered her gaze to the table. Daniel recognized the hesitation in her posture. She was deciding whether to let him in or keep him at arm's length. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "It's weird seeing you here. Makes me think about all the stuff we used to talk about." The bookstore. Daniel leaned forward. "Yeah, I remember." She smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Guess life had other plans. Daniel wanted to ask what those plans were. He wanted to demand answers, to know how the brightest girl in their neighborhood had ended up waiting tables in a diner outside Yuma. But the weight in her voice told him this wasn't the kind of story she wanted to spill in a room full of truckers and farmers who might overhear. So instead he asked, "How long have you been here?" She shrugged, her tone flat. "A while. It's steady work. Pays the bills." The way she said it, without conviction, without pride, told him more than any explanation could. At that moment, a group of noisy customers walked in, the kind who slapped the counter and called the cook by his first name. Grace's smile snapped back into place instantly, like a mask she'd worn 1,000 times. "Duty calls," she said, slipping out of the booth. Daniel watched her glide back into the rhythm of the diner, balancing plates, topping off mugs, laughing at jokes she'd heard 100 times. She moved like she belonged here, but Daniel knew better. He knew she was pretending, because when she thought no one was watching, he saw the cracks. Her smile would falter, her shoulders would slump, her eyes would drift to the front window, as though she were looking past the highway, past the desert, past the life that held her here. And then she'd catch herself, pull the smile back into place, and keep moving. Daniel sat in that booth longer than he intended. His toast grew cold, his coffee bitter, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from her. He thought about the girl who once told him she was going to own a business, travel the world, and never settle. He thought about the fire in her voice when she said she'd never be stuck, and he thought about the limp in her step, the tremor in her hands, and the way her smile had become more armor than joy. When the crowd thinned, Grace returned to his booth, leaning against the edge as though she didn't want to commit to sitting. "You still in touch with anyone from back home?" she asked. "Not really," Daniel admitted. "Life got busy." She gave a small, humorless smile. "Yeah, same here, except busy looks a little different for me." Daniel didn't miss the edge in her voice. "You want to talk about it?" Grace hesitated, then glanced toward the kitchen. Earl, the heavyset cook, was pretending to scrub a pan, but was clearly leaning half out the window to eavesdrop. She tilted her chin toward him. "Not here. Not with him listening." Daniel smirked. "You free after your shift?" Her eyes flicked toward the clock on the wall. "If I can get someone to cover the last hour, maybe." "But—" She trailed off, biting her lip. "Why? What's this about?" "Just catching up," he said. But he knew the truth was heavier than that. He wanted to know everything. He wanted to understand how the girl who once gave him hope had ended up here, in a place she swore she'd never be. Before she could respond, a man in a stained trucker cap rattled his empty mug in the air. "Grace, refill," she sighed. "Story of my life." And off she went, her limp just noticeable enough to twist Daniel's chest tighter. As he watched her disappear into the rhythm of the diner again, Daniel realized something. Grace wasn't just tired. She was carrying a weight she had never meant to shoulder. And the mask she wore, that smile too polished, too practiced, was beginning to crack. Daniel's empire had taught him 1,000 lessons about people, business, and survival, but the lesson forming in his mind now was different. He hadn't expected to find it in a dusty diner off Interstate 8, but it was as sharp as the desert air outside. Sometimes the people who once saved you are the ones most in need of saving themselves. And as Daniel sat there, watching Grace move through Maggie's diner with her smile stitched like armor, he made a quiet promise to himself. Before he left Yuma, he would find a way to learn what lay behind that smile, because he owed her more than he could ever repay. Daniel sat in the booth at Maggie's diner, watching the clock tick away as Grace worked tirelessly across the room. It had been nearly an hour since she'd left his side to handle the steady flow of customers, truckers and farmers who barely seemed to notice her exhaustion, too wrapped up in their own routines to care. He noticed, though. He noticed everything, the way she moved a little slower than she had when they were teenagers, how her smile, though still present, had lost its natural warmth, replaced by the automatic courtesy of someone who had long since stopped expecting kindness in return. The weight of the moment hung in the air between them, unspoken but thick with meaning. Grace had asked him, half jokingly, why he was staring at her. He had said he was remembering, but now, as he watched her slip between tables, the truth settled deeper in him. He wasn't just remembering. He was trying to make sense of how this could be the same girl, the one who had dreams as big as the desert sky, the one who had pushed him to keep going, even when he wanted to give up. He felt a strange urge to talk to her again, to ask the questions he hadn't dared to ask before. But he also felt a knot in his stomach, a hesitation that kept him rooted to his seat. Grace returned to his booth at last, her movements tired but practiced. She set a fresh pot of coffee on the table, then leaned against the edge of the booth, glancing at the clock on the wall behind him. "I've got 10 minutes," she said, her voice forced to sound light, but it cracked just slightly, as though even the effort of pretending was wearing her down. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. His childhood friend, the girl who had once believed so fiercely in her own potential, and now she seemed like a woman who had given up on ever seeing those dreams come true. He could see it in the way she spoke, the way she moved, and it tore at him. "I didn't come here to talk about my real estate empire," Daniel said quietly, pushing his coffee cup aside. "I came here to ask you about your life. What happened to you, Grace? What happened to all those dreams you had?" The question hung in the air, more blunt than he intended, but he couldn't hold it back. His own frustration bubbled over. This wasn't some casual conversation between old friends anymore. He had known Grace long enough to recognize the distance between the woman she had become and the girl he had once known. Grace stiffened slightly, her fingers tightening around the coffee pot in her hands. For a moment, she didn't respond. Instead, she stared at the floor, the steady rhythm of her breath, the only sound in the booth. Then she slowly exhaled, as if preparing herself to speak the words she had kept buried for years. "I thought I had a chance," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know, after high school, I had that scholarship to Arizona State, right? I was going to be somebody. I was going to leave Yuma behind." Daniel nodded, his heart tightening in his chest. He remembered those conversations, late nights talking about their futures, their escape. He had always known Grace had bigger dreams than this town could offer. He had imagined her going far, achieving everything they'd ever dreamed of together. "But then my mom got sick," Grace continued, her eyes darkening with the weight of the memory. "I had to drop out to take care of her. I couldn't leave her alone, not after everything she'd done for me." Daniel remained silent, letting her speak. He knew this part of the story, how Grace had always been the one to put others first, to sacrifice her own future for the sake of those she loved. But hearing it from her lips now, it struck him with a different force. "It wasn't just the sickness," she added, her voice shaking slightly. "It was the bills, medical costs, rent, everything. I couldn't keep up. After she passed, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go back, not with the weight of it all." Daniel's mind spun. Grace, the girl who had dreamed of bookstores and travel, was now living a life confined to the same small town they had both sworn they'd leave behind. "Then I married him," she said, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "The guy I thought would make everything better. He seemed stable, thought he could give me the life I wanted. Turns out he liked the idea of a wife who didn't ask questions. He liked the idea of a wife who didn't notice where the money was going." Daniel's breath caught. "Where was it going?" he asked, almost afraid of the answer. Grace looked up at him then, her eyes darker than he remembered, to a blackjack table in Laughlin. "And by the time I realized it, we didn't have anything left but the debts he'd racked up. He left 2 years ago, and I haven't heard from him since." Daniel felt a rush of anger, not just at the man who had taken advantage of Grace's kindness, but at himself for not seeing the depth of her pain sooner. "You've been here ever since?" he asked, his voice tight with disbelief. She nodded slowly. "Yeah, tried other jobs, but this is steady. Pays the bills. Not much else in town unless you've got a degree." Her shoulders sagged slightly as she finished the sentence, as though the weight of it all was pressing down on her once again. Daniel was silent for a long moment, processing what she had just shared. This wasn't just the girl he had known anymore. This was someone broken by life, someone who had lost not just her dreams, but her belief that things could get better. He reached across the table, his hand hovering just above hers, unsure whether she would let him comfort her. "Grace," he said softly, "this isn't your fault. You didn't lose. You were knocked down. That's different." Her eyes flicked up to his, her gaze hardening. "Easy for you to say, sitting in that suit with your real estate empire and everything you've built. But me, I'm stuck. Stuck in a dead-end diner in the middle of nowhere." Daniel's chest tightened, but he refused to back down. "You're not stuck, Grace. I know you're capable of more than this. You've always been capable of more." Grace's expression faltered for a second, as if she were about to say something more, but instead she just shook her head. "Don't do that, Daniel. Don't try to save me. I'm not some project you can fix." "I'm not trying to save you," he said quietly, leaning back in his seat. "I'm trying to remind you of who you are. The girl who never took no for an answer. The girl who told me we were going to leave this place behind and make something of ourselves." She looked away then, her hands trembling slightly as she refilled a nearby mug. "That girl died a long time ago," she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for him to hear. Daniel watched her, a knot in his stomach tightening. He had known Grace, truly known her, once upon a time. But the woman in front of him now, she was a stranger. The dreams they had shared were now ghosts, scattered like dust in the wind. But he wasn't ready to let those dreams die. Not for her, not for them. "Grace, please," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't let them die. You're still that girl. I know you are, and I won't let you give up on her." For the first time that afternoon, Grace looked up at him. Her eyes were filled with something she hadn't shown in years: uncertainty, and just maybe hope. The sun outside Maggie's diner had begun its slow descent behind the distant Arizona mountains, casting long shadows across the desert. The world seemed to settle into a muted quiet, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Inside, the hum of the air conditioner and the clink of silverware on ceramic were the only sounds, punctuated by the occasional murmur of voices. But in the small corner booth where Daniel Hayes and Grace Miller sat, the air was thick with something else, something unspoken, fragile and heavy. Grace had set her coffee pot aside and was now standing near the window, her back to him as she stared out at the empty stretch of highway. Her hands were pressed against the counter, palms flat as though she were bracing herself for something. He noticed how her shoulders sagged, how her fingers trembled slightly, the weight of her history pulling at her with every breath. Daniel's mind raced. He couldn't shake the image of her, the girl he had known, full of life and ambition, now seemingly worn down by the years, the dreamer who had once talked about opening a bookstore, traveling the world, and escaping the confines of a life built in the shadows of struggle. What had happened to that girl? And why had the woman before him abandoned all those dreams? His eyes never left her as he steeled himself for what he was about to do. It was a risk, one he wasn't sure he was ready to take, but the longer he sat there, the more he realized it was the only choice. He had come to Yuma expecting a quick stop, a minor inconvenience on the way to Phoenix, but what he found here was a reminder of something deeper, something more important than business deals or property acquisitions. It was about people, about the ones who had shaped him and the ones he had lost along the way. Grace Miller was one of those people, and he couldn't walk away without at least trying to help. "Grace," he said, his voice soft but firm, breaking the quiet like a pebble dropping into still water. She turned slowly, her eyes still clouded, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Daniel could see the questions in her eyes, the hesitation that had always been part of her. She had never been one to rush into decisions. It was both a strength and a flaw. He leaned forward, folding his arms across the table. "I've been thinking," he began, choosing his words carefully. "I know you're tired. I can see it in your eyes. But you're also capable of more than this, Grace. You've always been capable of more." Grace raised an eyebrow, a slight, skeptical smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. "And what do you mean by that? More than waiting tables at a rundown diner in the middle of nowhere?" Daniel's chest tightened at the bitter edge to her voice. "I'm offering you something more than just a job, Grace," he said, his tone firm but gentle. "I'm offering you a future, something real, something you can build. I've got a position open at one of my properties in Phoenix. It's a management role, responsible for overseeing a small office building, working with tenants, making sure everything runs smoothly." Grace's face fell slightly, her eyes narrowing. "Phoenix? You're offering me a job in Phoenix? You know I don't have the kind of education you're used to. I've barely got a high school diploma, Daniel. What makes you think I could handle something like that?" Daniel couldn't help but let out a quiet laugh. "Grace, you were always smarter than me. You've got a mind for business, for people, for problem solving. I've seen you handle situations with more grace and poise than any of the people I've worked with over the years. You don't need a degree to do this job. You just need the right attitude, and I know you've got that." Her face remained unreadable, but Daniel could see the flicker of uncertainty behind her eyes. He pressed on. "I'm not offering this because I feel sorry for you. I'm offering it because I believe in you. You taught me how to keep going, even when everything seemed impossible. And now I want to help you see that same potential in yourself again." Grace took a step back, her gaze drifting to the window once more. She stood there for a long moment, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter. Daniel waited, watching her, knowing this was the moment where everything could either fall apart or shift. She let out a heavy sigh and turned back to face him, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. "You're asking me to leave Yuma, Daniel, to leave everything I've known, everything I've built. And for what? A job in some office building in Phoenix? What if it doesn't work out? What if I fail?" "You won't fail," Daniel said, his voice low but certain. "I wouldn't offer it if I didn't think you could do it. I wouldn't take this risk if I didn't believe in you." Grace's eyes softened, and for the first time in their conversation, Daniel saw a crack in the armor she had built around herself. Her face was still drawn, the lines of fatigue marking her features, but there was a flicker of something else now, something unfamiliar, something that hadn't been there when she first walked into the diner that afternoon. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've been stuck here for so long. I've given up on the idea of ever going anywhere. I've been stuck in this place, stuck in this life. And it's easier to just stay here, Daniel. It's safer." "I know," Daniel said softly, rising from the booth and moving closer to her. "I know it's easier, but nothing worth having ever comes easy. Nothing changes if we don't take risks. I'm not asking you to leave everything behind. I'm asking you to take a chance at something different, something better. You've spent so long putting everyone else first, Grace. It's time you put yourself first for once." She looked at him then, her eyes filled with a mixture of doubt and something else, something that, for a brief moment, almost seemed like hope. "You're asking me to trust you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Daniel nodded, his gaze never wavering. "I am. I'm asking you to trust me, and I'm asking you to trust yourself again. You don't have to do this alone. I'll help you. We'll do it together." Grace stared at him for a long time, her lips parted as though she wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. The silence stretched between them, each second a weight that hung in the air, pressing on both of them. Finally, she took a deep breath, her eyes falling to the floor, before slowly meeting his gaze once more. "I don't know, Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's so much to risk. I know, but sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards. She stared at him for another moment, her face a mixture of uncertainty and longing, before she gave the faintest nod. Okay, she said softly, the word barely audible, but it was there, the beginning of something new. Daniel felt a surge of relief wash over him. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was enough. Grace had taken the first step, and that was all he needed. Okay, he echoed, his voice steady. We'll take it one step at a time. As Grace turned back to her work, something shifted in the air between them, like the first breath of a new chapter. There was no guarantee that things would be easy, no promise that everything would fall into place. But for the first time in years, Grace Miller was allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than what she had settled for. And for Daniel, that was enough. The evening had settled in slowly, as it always did in the desert, quiet and heavy, as though the land itself had learned to take its time. The air was thick with heat, even though the sun had long disappeared behind the horizon. The orange glow of the diner's neon sign flickered, casting an erratic light across the parking lot, and the hum of crickets filled the air outside. Inside, Daniel sat back in his booth, the corners of his mind still tangled in the conversation with Grace. Her words had hung between them like an unspoken challenge, an invitation to something neither of them fully understood yet. He had given her a choice, an escape, a chance to rebuild her life, but whether she would take it, he couldn't say. He had risked more than just his reputation in offering her a way out. He had risked their shared past, the delicate trust that had once bound them together as teenagers, but he had done it anyway. And now, he waited. The silence in the diner was thick, almost suffocating. The soft clink of dishes, and the occasional shuffle of waitstaff, the only sounds to break it. Grace had said okay, but there was no certainty in her voice, no conviction. He had seen it in her eyes, the hesitation, the fear. She wasn't ready, not yet. It was clear that she was grappling with something deeper than just a job offer. This wasn't just about leaving Yuma or even Phoenix. It was about leaving behind the life she had settled into, about stepping away from the safety of the familiar and into the unknown. That kind of decision wasn't made lightly. Daniel's mind wandered back to the moment when she had looked at him, her eyes soft but filled with doubt. He had seen it, that flicker of something that might have been hope. But he had also seen the weight of the years in her face, the toll of a life spent trying to make do with what little was given to her. That was the woman sitting across from him now, the one who had been knocked down time and time again, and had learned to survive in a world that hadn't been kind to her. But the woman he remembered, the girl who had dared to dream bigger than anyone around her, was still there. Daniel knew it. He had to believe it. The conversation had ended with her agreeing to think about it. But what did that mean? How long would it take her to make up her mind? He had offered her a way out of the life she had been stuck in for years, but he couldn't make the decision for her. And for all his confidence, for all his belief in her potential, he couldn't ignore the truth. This was her life to reclaim, not his to hand back. Outside, the desert was still. The stars hung high in the sky, distant and unyielding. It was a night like any other in Yuma, yet for Daniel everything felt different. He had come here expecting nothing more than a brief interruption in his routine, and now, as the silence stretched between him and Grace, he realized how much he had left behind in his pursuit of success. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten the importance of those who had helped him get here. Grace had been one of those people, and now she needed him. But could he really help her? The thought of her staying here, trapped in the same routine, pouring coffee for people who would never see the dreams she had, made him uneasy. He wanted more for her. He had always wanted more for her. Grace's footsteps approached, breaking his reverie. He looked up, seeing her once again in that faded apron, her face softer now than it had been earlier. There was something in the way she carried herself now, something that had shifted since their conversation. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into the diner that afternoon. She slid into the booth across from him, her eyes still shadowed, but there was a lightness to her that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it was just the weight of her decision, whether she realized it or not, that had shifted. She sat, her hands folding neatly in front of her, a far cry from the nervous fidgeting that had marked her earlier movements. "Do you always wait this long to hear what people have to say?" Grace asked, a slight teasing edge to her voice. But Daniel could tell it was more than just a casual question. She was still sorting through the decision in her head. "I don't," Daniel said, his voice steady, but with a hint of warmth. "But I'm giving you the time you need. This isn't a small decision, Grace. I know that." She nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "It's not. But the more I think about it, the more I realize I've been stuck for so long. I've convinced myself that this was all I could do. I convinced myself that the dreams I had, those dreams with you, were just childish fantasies, that I was never going to leave this place." Daniel leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "Grace, you can still leave. You can still do more. This doesn't have to be it. I'm not offering you a job to pity you. I'm offering you a chance to build something for yourself. You've spent too long believing you're stuck. You're not stuck. Not anymore." Her eyes flickered to his, searching, as if weighing the sincerity of his words. "And what if I fail, Daniel? What if I leave Yuma and fall flat on my face? What if I'm not who you think I am?" Her voice trembled slightly, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "It's safer here. I know how to survive here." Daniel felt a pang in his chest, but he didn't look away. "You're right. It's safer here. But that doesn't mean you're living. And you deserve to live, Grace. Really live. You've earned that." She took a deep breath, and for a moment the diner seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, caught in the crossfire of their past and future. The weight of her years, of her struggle, was in the air, palpable, but so was the spark of something else, something brighter, something new. "I don't know, Daniel," she said softly, her voice quieter than before. "It's hard to even imagine a life outside this place. It feels like I'm giving up everything, my past, my memories, the people here. I've built a life around this town, even if it's not the life I imagined. How do you just walk away from that?" Daniel's heart clenched. He had known Grace for too long to ignore the truth in her words. This wasn't just about a job. This was about everything she had built and everything she had given up along the way. "Grace, I'm not asking you to walk away from who you are. I'm asking you to be who you were meant to be," he said, his voice steady, but with an edge of emotion he couldn't hide. "You have the power to create a new life, one that's yours. I'm offering you that chance, but only you can take it." She sat there, staring at him, her face unreadable. The silence stretched between them, thick with meaning. Finally, she stood up slowly, pushing her chair back. Her gaze lingered on him for a long moment, then shifted to the door. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice softer than it had been all afternoon. And as she turned and walked away, Daniel watched her go, knowing that whatever decision she made, whatever path she chose, it would change everything. But for now, he had done all he could. Now it was up to her. The next morning, Daniel sat in a modest motel room just off the highway, staring at his coffee cup as the soft light of early dawn filtered through the curtains. The desert outside still held the remnants of the night's coolness, but inside the room everything felt stagnant, as though the air itself was waiting. He had gone over their conversation from the previous night 100 times in his mind. The way Grace had looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty and fear. She had agreed to think about the offer, but he had known it wasn't that simple. She wasn't ready to leap into the unknown, not without some certainty, not without a plan. He understood that. Hell, he had spent years building his empire piece by piece, and even now he sometimes wished he could go back and approach some of those decisions with more caution, But he had also learned that the biggest risks often led to the greatest rewards, and he couldn't help but feel that this was a chance Grace needed to take. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, the weight of uncertainty hung heavily in the room. He kept imagining her still in that diner, walking the same worn path between tables, trapped by a life that had stopped offering any surprises. He thought about how long she had been there, how long she had been holding on to a life that was comfortable in its predictability, but suffocating all the same. He wanted to help her, wanted to give her that chance to break free, but there was only so much he could do. His phone buzzed suddenly, the noise cutting through his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. His heart skipped a beat. He had been waiting for this. He had been waiting for Grace to call, to make a decision. He hadn't expected her to make it last night. He had known it was too soon, too much for her to process all at once. But this call, this moment, could be the turning point. He picked up the phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he pressed it to his ear. Hello? The voice on the other end was shaky, almost fragile, as though it was still in the process of gathering strength. Daniel? It was Grace. His stomach tightened at the sound of her voice, thick with emotion but still hesitant. Yeah, it's me, Daniel replied, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. Grace, are you okay? There was a long pause. He could almost hear her breathing, the way she was sorting through her words before letting them slip out. He waited, patient as always, giving her the time she needed. I've been thinking about what you said, she started, her voice soft, almost fragile. About about leaving Yuma, about taking that job. And I don't know, Daniel, I just her words faltered, and for a moment Daniel could hear her hesitation, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. It was all he could do to keep himself from rushing in, to let her speak. I don't know if I can do this, she continued, the words coming faster now, her fear bleeding through. I'm scared. What if it doesn't work out? What if I can't handle it? I've been stuck here for so long, I don't even know if I know how to live anywhere else. What if I leave and I fail? Daniel's chest tightened at the rawness in her voice, the vulnerability she was finally allowing herself to show. He could feel the weight of her years of struggle in every word. He knew how hard this was for her, how deeply rooted her fears were. She had spent so long in survival mode, always holding on, never daring to let go and reach for something more. And now, the thought of taking that first step, of leaving everything behind, was terrifying to her. Grace, he said softly, his voice steady, but filled with conviction, I'm not asking you to leave everything behind and jump into the unknown without support. I'm asking you to take a chance on yourself. You've already done the hardest part. You've been surviving. Now you have a chance to live. She let out a breath, a small sob that caught in her throat. Daniel could hear the struggle in her voice, but he refused to let her retreat. Daniel, I've always been the one who had to take care of everyone else. I've always been the one who had to make things work, even when they didn't. And now I don't even know who I am anymore. I don't know if I'm strong enough for something like this. Her words sliced through him like a knife. He had known Grace for so long, and he had never imagined hearing her speak like this. She had always been the strong one, the one who carried them both when things got tough. To hear her doubt herself, to hear her question her worth, made his heart ache. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Daniel said, his voice low but firm. You've already faced the hardest part, Grace. The hardest part was keeping going when everything was falling apart. But you didn't quit. You kept going even when you thought you couldn't. That's strength. You've already proven that. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Daniel could hear her breathing, slower now, as though she were gathering herself, processing his words. Do you really believe that? She asked, the question hanging in the air between them. Yes, I do, Daniel replied without hesitation, and I'm offering you the chance to prove it to yourself. You don't have to do this alone, Grace. I'm here. I'm offering you the opportunity to change your life, but you have to take it. I can't do it for you. I can't make this decision for you. but I know you're capable of more than this. I know you can be the woman you always dreamed of being." She was quiet for a long time, and Daniel held his breath, waiting for her to speak. The seconds felt like hours, the tension stretching between them, until finally Grace's voice came through, soft but steady. "I'm scared," she said, the words almost a whisper, "but I think I'm ready to try." Daniel's heart surged with relief, but he kept his voice calm. "That's all I'm asking. Take one step at a time. You don't have to have it all figured out right now, but I'll be there every step of the way." Grace's voice cracked slightly as she spoke again, but there was something different now, something brighter. "Okay," she said, the words small but full of meaning. "Okay, I'll do it. I'll take the chance." Daniel smiled, a wave of relief washing over him. "I'm proud of you, Grace. This is just the beginning." As the call ended, Daniel sat back in his chair, the weight of the moment settling in. Grace had taken the first step. She had decided to leave her past behind and take the leap into the unknown. He didn't know what the future held for her, but for the first time in years, he could see the possibility of something better for her. He had helped her see it, and that was enough. 3 months had passed since that shaky phone call, since Grace had finally taken the leap, and now, as Daniel Hayes walked into his office in Phoenix, he couldn't help but notice the difference in the air. It wasn't just the brisk hum of office chatter or the flurry of activity that signaled a normal day in the corporate world. No, it was the subtle change in the atmosphere, the quiet strength that now seemed to permeate everything. He had known Grace for years. He had watched her struggle, fight to keep her head above water in a world that never gave her the breaks she deserved. He had seen the cracks, the moments when her resilience faltered, and he had promised her that one day she'd see what he saw in her. He'd promised her that she was capable of more. And now, here she was. It had been 3 months since that fateful night in Yuma, when Grace had decided to take his offer and start a new life. The woman who had once been trapped behind the counter of Maggie's diner was no longer hiding behind that same mask. She was standing tall now, her face lit with the quiet confidence of someone who had discovered something deep inside herself, something she had long forgotten. As Daniel entered the lobby of his office building, the receptionist smiled up at him. "Mr. Hayes, Miss Miller is waiting for you in your office." The words took him by surprise, even though he had known this moment would come. He had expected it, of course. He had expected Grace to rise to the challenge, to take her place in the world she had once dreamed of. But hearing those words, hearing her name associated with his office, filled him with an unexpected sense of pride. "Thank you," he said, a smile tugging at his lips as he made his way down the sleek modern hallway. When he reached his office, he knocked lightly before pushing the door open. Grace was sitting behind his desk, her back straight, her posture confident. She was no longer the woman who had walked into Maggie's diner with a weary smile and a deep sense of defeat. This was the woman who had taken a chance on herself, the woman who had fought through her fears and was now standing on the other side. She looked up as he entered, her eyes lighting up with a smile that wasn't just polite or forced, it was real. "Hey, boss," she said, a teasing lilt to her voice that made him chuckle. "Hey, yourself," Daniel replied, leaning against the door frame as he took her in. Her professional attire suited her now, a sharp suit jacket and a blouse that brought out the brightness of her eyes. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her makeup subtle, but enhancing the natural strength in her features. She looked every bit the part of the woman who had earned her seat at this table. "I see you've settled in," he said, nodding toward the papers neatly organized on the desk. Grace smirked, though there was a touch of pride in her eyes. "You could say that. I've been busy, but it's starting to feel like home here." Daniel smiled, his chest swelling with a sense of satisfaction. "I knew you'd get there. You've got the heart for it." She looked up at him, her smile softening, and for a moment he saw the vulnerability that had once been her armor. "It wasn't easy, you know. I almost gave up a few times, There were nights when I wondered if I was out of my depth, if I had made a huge mistake, but then I'd remember why I was doing it. I remembered you. His heart swelled, and he pushed off the doorframe to move closer to the desk. I knew you could do it, Grace. I knew you had it in you. You've always had it in you. She shook her head slightly, her expression growing more serious. I didn't always believe that, Daniel. For so long I thought I was just a girl from a small town, that this life wasn't for me. But now, sitting here with a job I'm proud of, I realize just how much I've been holding myself back. He nodded, understanding the weight of her words. It's a big thing, believing in yourself. I'm proud of you, Grace. I knew you were capable, but you had to see it too. You had to believe you could be more than what you thought you were. She smiled softly, her gaze drifting down to her hands for a moment, as though she were remembering the long, hard road she had walked. I think I've finally figured that out. I'm more than just someone who survived. I'm someone who can thrive, and it's all because of you. Daniel shook his head, his voice soft. No, Grace, you did this. You took the leap. I just showed you the door. You're the one who walked through it. For a moment, the air between them was thick with unspoken understanding, and in that quiet, there was no need for more words. They both knew what had been accomplished in the past 3 months. They both knew the struggle Grace had faced and the victory she had claimed. I'm not done yet, she said, breaking the silence and looking up at him with renewed determination. There's still a lot to learn, a lot to do. But I'm ready for it. I'm ready to keep growing. He smiled at her, proud of the woman she had become. I have no doubt you'll keep surprising me, Grace, and I'll be right here, cheering you on every step of the way. She laughed, a light, carefree sound that filled the room. Well, don't get too comfortable because I've got big plans. I'm thinking about taking on more responsibility around here, maybe even managing a whole building. Who knows, maybe one day I'll be the one offering people opportunities. Daniel's eyes lit up with pride as he leaned back, arms crossed. I have no doubt you'll get there. And when you do, I'll be the one asking for a job. They shared a laugh, but underneath it there was something deeper, a mutual respect, a quiet acknowledgement of everything they had both overcome. Daniel had always believed in Grace, but now, watching her sit there, confident and poised, he realized that her strength had always been there. She had just needed someone to remind her of it. As the day wore on and the bustle of the office continued around them, Daniel felt a deep sense of contentment settle over him. This was the beginning of something new, not just for Grace, but for both of them. She had reclaimed her future, and in doing so, had reminded him of the importance of seeing the potential in others even when they couldn't see it themselves. He had given her a chance, but it was she who had turned it into a new beginning. And as the sun set behind the office building, casting long shadows across the parking lot, Daniel knew this was only the start of Grace's journey, and maybe, just maybe, it was the start of his own too. 3 months had passed, and for Grace Miller, the world seemed both unfamiliar and thrilling all at once. She had always known that change was difficult, but never in her life had she imagined it would feel like this. Every morning, as she stepped into her office in Phoenix, she was met with a sense of purpose that had once been nothing more than a distant dream, a promise she had made to herself when she was a teenager. She wasn't just working for a paycheck anymore. She was building something real. She was building her future. Her office was modest, tucked away on the corner of the building, but it was hers. The work was challenging, and there were days when the weight of it all pressed heavily on her shoulders. There were moments when she doubted herself, when the old fears crept in, the fear of failing, the fear of not being enough. But each time she reminded herself of how far she had come. She had survived years of hardship, had rebuilt her life from the ground up. If she could survive those years in Yuma, she could survive anything. And this time, she was doing more than surviving. She was thriving. One crisp autumn morning, As the sun began to rise over the Phoenix skyline, Daniel Hayes walked into her office as confident and unshakable as ever. He looked at her now with a sense of pride that went deeper than words could express. He had watched her change, had watched her grow into the woman he had always known she could be. It was a journey that had started on the dusty streets of Yuma and led them both here, where they were both finding new purpose in their lives, finding ways to give back. "You've come a long way, Grace," Daniel said, leaning against her desk. He had that look in his eyes, the one that said he had seen her at her lowest and now saw her standing at the top of a new mountain, a place she had earned, a place she belonged. Grace smiled, the same smile she had given him on their first meeting in the diner, but now it was warmer, more confident. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, her voice steady, but there was emotion in it, a deep sense of gratitude. She had learned a lot in these 3 months. She had learned that life was full of second chances, that it was never too late to change course, to rewrite the story of your life. "I'm not so sure about that," Daniel replied with a chuckle. "You did the hard part. I just gave you a little push." But Grace shook her head. "You saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. You gave me that chance, Daniel. And now, look at me. I'm not just working for a living. I'm living for something more." Her words hung in the air, and Daniel felt a swell of pride. He had made a lot of deals over the years, signed countless contracts, built an empire from nothing. But this was the real achievement. Seeing Grace transform before his eyes, watching her embrace her worth, watching her step into a future she had always dreamed of, that was the true reward. But the impact of Grace's decision reached far beyond her own life. As she stood in the office building that now felt like home, she reflected on how far she had come and how much further she was willing to go. She had worked hard to get here, but now she wanted to do more. She wanted to give back, to offer the same chance to others that Daniel had given her. One morning, as the cool desert wind blew through the open windows of her office, Grace made a decision. She was going to start her own initiative, a foundation dedicated to helping people like her, people who had gotten lost along the way, people who had forgotten their potential. She wanted to help them find their way back, to show them that it was never too late to chase a new dream. She called it the Miller Foundation, and its mission was simple: to provide mentorship, financial support, and resources to individuals who had fallen through the cracks, just like she had. She wanted to help them rebuild their lives, to offer them a chance to start over, just as Danielle had offered her. The first event the foundation hosted was small, held in the same office building where Grace now worked. She stood at the podium, speaking to a room full of people who had been invited to hear about the new initiative. Many of them were from similar backgrounds, individuals who had struggled in ways she knew all too well. Some were veterans, some were single parents, and some were just lost in a system that didn't care to help them. As she spoke, Grace felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She was no longer just someone who had survived. She was someone who had found a way to give back, to make a difference in the world. She spoke about her own struggles, about the fear she had felt when she first walked away from Yuma, and how she had learned that it was never too late to make a change. "I know what it feels like to be stuck, she said, her voice strong and unwavering. "I know what it feels like to think that you're not worth more than what you've been given. But I'm here to tell you that you are. You are capable of more than you think. You just have to take that first step." As the room filled with applause, Grace felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. This was it. This was the legacy she wanted to leave behind. She wasn't just going to be a success story, she was going to help create more success stories, to give people the same opportunity she had been given. And for the first time in years, she truly believed she could do it. Daniel had given her the push she needed, but now she was standing on her own 2 feet. She was no longer defined by her past. She had turned it into something beautiful, something meaningful, and that, more than anything, was the reward. As she looked out at the room of people, all of them listening intently, she realized that this was just the beginning. There were more people out there, people who needed someone to believe in them. just like Daniel had believed in her. She wasn't just going to change her own life, she was going to change the lives of countless others. And as the applause continued to ring in her ears, she knew that everything had led to this moment, the moment when she could finally say that the life she had once dreamed of wasn't just possible, it was real, and she had earned every part of it. In the end, it wasn't about the job or the money, it wasn't about the office or the foundation, it was about the power of one decision, the courage to take that first step, and the belief that anything was possible if you just dared to try. And as Grace Miller stood in front of that room, she knew that the future was hers to create, and that, for the first time, was enough. If Grace's journey from uncertainty to success resonated with you, imagine what taking your own first step toward change could look like. Whether you're looking to reinvent your career, overcome a personal struggle, or simply find the courage to move forward, we all have the potential to rewrite our story just like Grace did. If you found this story inspiring, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What's the one change you've been waiting to make in your life? Drop a comment below and share your story. I'd love to support you along the way. Don't forget to like this video if it inspired you, and hit that subscribe button to join a community of people who are all about growth, transformation, and embracing new beginnings. By subscribing, you'll get access to more content that can help you take that next step, find new opportunities, and live the life you deserve. Let's keep the conversation going, and together, let's make sure we never settle for less than what we're capable of.